All right, there we go. Okay, so we're back to Proclus's commentary on the Timaeus, and we are just going to pick up right where we left off and get through this thing. And I am enjoying it, by the way. It's good stuff. All right, so let's see. Socrates, so we left off at this lemma in the dialogue. It is your business, therefore, O Timaeus, and that of the company present, to fill up the part of this absent person. Okay, back to Proclus. This also accords with what we have said, for in natures which are more causal and divine, quantity is always contracted, and multitude diminished, but power transcends. And this also is a dogma of the Pythagoreans, with whom the triad is more venerable than the tetrad than the decad, and all the numbers within than those posterior to the decad. And in short, that which is nearer to the principle has a more primordial nature. Right, that is natural, given that the one is the highest principle ontologically. It's also the good, so what is superior morally and also like metaphysically will be more contracted, unitive, closer to oneness. But that which is more primordial is more powerful, since all power is antecedently comprehended in the principle, and from the principle is imparted to other things. If, therefore, the principle of things was multitude, it would be requisite that what is more multitudinous should be more primordial and powerful than what is less so. Since, however, the principle is a monad, that which is more monadic is more excellent and more powerful than things which are more separated from their cause. Hence, Socrates very properly makes a diminution of number to be a symbol of superior perfection, which antecedently comprehends according to power all secondary natures, and fills up their deficiency. But since, as we have before observed, Socrates is the summit of this triad of auditors, right? Timaeus stood for the demiurge of wholes, and then there was the triad, Socrates, Critias, Hermocrates, and I believe that would equate to the intellective demiurge, the demiurge of soul, and then the demiurge of nature. That was the triad that Proclus seemed to affirm before. But he'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But since, as we have before observed, Socrates is the summit of this triad of auditors, and he conjoins himself to the monad that disposes the conference, conformably to the image of demiurgic gods, it is worthwhile to observe how he exempts Timaeus from the rest, and how he is extended to him, as to the dispensator of the whole discussion. He conjoins, however, the other auditors to himself, as being inferior to him in desert. Okay, I want to look back at the lemma, or the quote. It is your business, therefore, O Timaeus. Okay, so he addresses himself specifically to Timaeus, indicating that special connection between the superior member of the triad of demiurges to the demiurge of wholes. So similarly, the one, there's the exempt one, and then there's the abiding, processing, reverting triad of the one, which is immediately following it, and the abiding aspect of that trinity is most akin to the exempt transcendent one. So here, the intellective demiurge corresponds to that kind of abiding nature of the Trinity, and that's most conjoined to the demiurge of wholes. And then how does he connect that of the company present to fill up the part of this absent person? So he singles Timaeus out, but also involves the rest of the company. Okay, for these things may be referred to divine causes, in which the first of the demiurgic triad is united to the primary monad, and extends the other parts of the triad to it. It also, I guess it's worth noting that for Proclus, the leading monad of a series is that which connects the members of that series to the next order above. There are actually two main ways Proclus identifies with connecting to the next order above you. One is finding your corresponding member of a superior series. So for us, that would be our presiding daimon, tutelary spirit. So the order of spirits is above the order of mortal souls that are embodied. So we find the spirit that corresponds to us, and that joins us to the next order up. Or we have the leading member of our own series, which we can connect with based on affinity, and then that, being superior, is closer to the next order up, and so that's kind of a path up. Either the corresponding member of the next series up, or the leading member of your own series. Not entirely the point that he was just making there, but sort of related. It also calls forth, indeed, the productive energy of the monad, but excites the energies of the rest to fabrication. These things, therefore, are conformable to what has been said before. But according to Porphyry, the ethical doctrine contained in these words is this, that friends ought to endure all things for each other, both in words and deeds, and to supply their wants, and cause them to be unindigent by filling up their deficiency. For these are the peculiarities of pure and genuine friendships, providing for each other's needs. Iamblichus, however, supposed that the anonymous person was superior to those that were present, and was a lover of the contemplation of intelligibles. He says that Socrates indicates by these words that though generated fall short of the nature of truly existing beings, yet a certain similitude is divulsed from these beings. Okay. And conformably to this, the theory which is conversant with nature participates in a certain respect of the science of intelligibles, and this, the filling up, the part of the absent person manifests. Let's review Iamblichus's theory again, because I honestly wasn't quite following that. So let's go back here. Iamblichus, however, having supposed that the anonymous person was superior to those that were present, and was a lover of the contemplation of intelligibles, says that Socrates indicates by these words, and those words being, it is your business, O Timaeus, and that of the company, to fill up the part of the absent person. So by that, Socrates indicates, according to Iamblichus, that though generated fall short of the nature of truly existing beings. Okay, so the fourth absent person is going to be the really real, and then the rest are more akin to generated natures, being inferior, on Iamblichus's view. Yet a certain similitude is divulsed from these beings. So the generated natures show forth a similitude of the intelligible, and that's how we know the intelligible, by the image of the intelligible in the sensible. That's primarily how we know the intelligible. And conformably to this, the theory which is conversant with nature participates in a certain respect of the science of intelligibles, and this, the filling up the part of the absent person. Okay, so that makes sense. Next quote, Timaeus, entirely so, Socrates, and we shall endeavor to the utmost of our ability to leave nothing belonging to such an employment unaccomplished. For it would not be just that we, who were yesterday entertained by you, in such a manner as guests ought to be received, should not return the hospitality with readiness and delight. Okay, the manners of Timaeus are indicated by these words, for they are shown to be superb and modest, elevated and elegant, friendly and philanthropic. For the words entirely so indicate his promptitude respecting the absent person, and the perfection of the science according to which he is readily disposed to fill up what is wanting in others, and they also indicate his genuine sincerity. But the words, quote, we shall endeavor to the utmost of our ability to leave nothing belonging to such an employment unaccomplished, end quote, sufficiently present to our view his firmness in the fulfillment of his promises and his modesty in speaking of himself. Such, therefore, are the ethical indications that may be surveyed in these words. But the physical indications are these, that the remuneration of discussion, the repayment of discussion, conveys an image of the communion and compensation of powers through which all things are coordinated and contribute to the one harmony of the universe. So the same thought as before, where the gods banqueting and exchanging goods is mirrored in our world, in our discourses, and exchange of intelligible contents is more proper to the gods and to our souls. Ultimately, the sciences are better food for the soul than literal food is. So repaying this discussion just shows how these various orders of nature coordinate and contribute to one another, so that is in harmony with the universe. Likewise, that the energies of nature are changed according to time, different energies operating at different times on different subjects. Okay. How is the timeliness emphasized in that quote? Yesterday entertained by you, should be done now. Yeah, so there's a proper time for each thing, indicating that is, if this is like symbolical of the scopos of the dialogue, the physical nature, then fate coordinates the proper timing of all things, and there is an appropriate season for everything. Okay. For to these indications, the words, quote, return the hospitality to you by whom we were yesterday entertained in such a manner as guests ought to be received, end quote, are similar. That which is theologically indicated is this, that the demiurgic cause proceeds through and fills all things and cuts off every deficiency through his own power and his prolific abundance, according to which he leaves nothing destitute of himself. For he is characterized by the superplenary, the sufficient, and all perfect. Moreover, the expression return the hospitality is derived from the banqueting in divine fables, according to which the gods pledge each other, quote, in golden goblets they each other pledge, from the Iliad, being filled with nectar from the mighty Jupiter. Nor is it simply said to feast, but to return the hospitality, or to feast in return. For a reciprocation of feasting comprehends the entire and complete perfect plenitude of banqueting, but this also is seen in wholes. For the visible orders of things call forth invisible powers through their own consummate aptitude, and the latter, through transcendency of goodness, perfect the former. Right, so the invisible powers perfect the visible orders of things, and the visible call forth the invisible, like with the Iamblichus interpretation a couple paragraphs back. All these likewise are conjoined with each other, and the communication of perfection becomes the retribution of calling forth. Okay. So reciprocity between these powers is involved in this perfection. On that point, I guess, one of the dictums of Proclus from the Elements of Theology is that once a being perfects its own nature, it goes on to perfect subsequent natures. That's the natural order of things, and that's kind of the Proclean explanation for the unfolding of being. The answer to the one and the many is that the one being all good, after perfecting itself, goes on to generate and perfect subsequent natures. But there, as I said, is more of an emphasis on the reciprocal back and forth nature of that procession now. I would say of all the Neoplatonists, Proclus emphasizes more the top-down. You can see more of a reciprocal back and forth in Numenius, the Middle Platonist, probably more of it in Plotinus, definitely more of it in Damascius. Farther still, to do all these things, accompanied with justice, conveys an image of the justice which arranges all things in conjunction with Jupiter. But the becoming, or in such a manner as guests ought to be received, is an image of the cause which illuminates wholes with demiurgic beauty. Okay. the becoming is an image of the cause which illuminates wholes with demiurgic beauty. So all I'm really getting out of that is that I might have to go back. This happens. It gets a little bit dense sometimes. Okay, all these likewise are conjoined with each other, and the communication of perfection becomes the retribution of calling forth. Farther still, to do all these things, accompanied with justice, conveys an image of the justice which arranges all things in conjunction with Jupiter. So again, the brief saying of Timaeus there recalls this kind of divine justice that arranges things in the universe as well. But the becoming, or in such a manner as guests ought to be received, is an image of the cause which illuminates wholes with demiurgic beauty. So what is becoming or appropriate in this conversation is an image of the cause of demiurgic beauty in the cosmos, which I guess the aptness or appropriateness of things judged by the divine intellect has its kind of microcosm there. All right. And the term guests is an image of the variety which is defined according to divine peculiarities. Okay. So guests, maybe that's related to the other rather than the same. And so like the dyad rather than the monad. And so guests indicates that variety of powers, each kind of appropriate and apt in its own way. All right, for each of the divine natures possesses appropriate powers and energies, and therefore Socrates feasted Timaeus with the discourses of his own philosophy. Thus also each of the gods, energizing conformably to his proper powers, contributes to the one and transcendent providential attention of the demiurge to the whole of things. Right, and these particulars are exhibited as an exercise to the theory of things, which presents itself to the view after the manner of an image in the introduction to the dialogue. From these things, likewise, the times of the dialogue, the Republic, and the Timaeus are manifest, since the one is supposed to have taken place during the Bendidian festival in the Piraeus, but the other on the following day of the festival. For that the Bendidian festival was celebrated in the Piraeus on the 19th of April, that's my birthday, is acknowledged by those who have written concerning festivals, so that the Timaeus must be supposed to have taken place on the 20th of the same month. That's Hitler's birthday. But if, as will be observed in what follows, this dialogue is supposed to have taken place during the Panathenaean festival, it is evident that this was the less Panathenaea. So there were two Athenian festivals, and this was the lesser, for the greater was celebrated on the 28th of June, according to the narration of those whom we have just mentioned. Okay, so we can keep going. Next quote, Socrates, do you remember, therefore, the magnitude and quality of the things which I propose to you to explain? So they had already kind of prearranged that they were going to produce this kind of image or model of the ideal society in action. And so Critias is going to supply the Atlantis story for that purpose. The connection why Timaeus gives this physical discourse isn't totally explained, unless you want to say that it is setting the kind of physical stage on which the Atlantis Athens drama would be unfolding. But yeah, the way that like Timaeus breaks in, if you just read the first section of the Timaeus up to where Timaeus himself begins to give his monologue, you wouldn't necessarily know at all that the topic of the dialogue was going to be physics, you know. So it does kind of come in abruptly. I wonder if that, I mean, obviously Proclus is kind of presuming the unitive purpose of the dialogue all throughout. But when you read the dialogue itself, it does seem kind of abrupt. Like, it's not totally clear why Timaeus feels that that kind of speech is addressing the concerns that Socrates is going to be talking about coming up in the dialogue here. But anyway, In the first place, it is requisite to attend to the order of the heads of what is said, of which that concerning the multitude of those that form the conference is the leader. The next to this pertains to the filling up the part of him who is absent, and the third is that which is now added, the respects, and respects the explication of the things proposed to be discussed. Okay, so first you attend to the order of the heads, order of the people involved, character, symbolism, and then who is absent, address the absent person, and now it's natural to then explicate the topic of what they're going to discuss. But these are in continuity with each other, and with reference to the order, it is requisite to understand the accuracy of the words, for the words, do you remember, exhibit distributed knowledge in the participations of discourse. For in the demiurge, the recollection of all things is a separate, exempt, and uniform knowledge, according to the mnemosyne which he contains. That's the muse of memory, which he contains, and which is the firm establishment of divine intelligence. Well, that's important. So this is the demiurge himself, the demiurge of wholes. He contains the muse of memory, and that muse of memory at the intellectual level is what firmly establishes divine intelligence. I guess bear that in mind. So memory even would apply, but in a different way, to divine intelligences as well, even the demiurge. For us, memory is like you're missing some piece of information that you had and you call it back. But obviously for an eternal intelligence, the nature of that memory will be, it'll operate differently. And this, in the secondary gods, is a subordinate intellection, of both which the present persons are images. Okay. In the secondary gods, that recollection is a subordinate intellection of both which the present persons are images. We're just going to keep going through here. Through this memory, likewise, which pre-exists in the universe, whole souls are established in intelligibles, and the demiurgic reasons or productive principles possess an immutable and an immovable nature. So memory is connected with that immutability, immovability, and so memory pre-exists in the universe. Whole souls are established in intelligibles. So memory for us is like hearkening back to something, but memory for intelligibles, I guess, is like capable of drawing in whole souls to itself. So what is superior causally contains the seeds of what is lower. So to take in the whole soul is an act of memory, even though it's sort of pronoia rather than, a backward looking. Okay, whole souls are, pronoia is the word for providence, but it means like forward mindedness, looking forward towards something else. So a proactive looking at subsequent orders of being can also be a kind of memory. So memory, we're seeing it operates in different ways at different levels. It's constitutive of the divine intelligence, what gives it firmness. Okay, this is all good stuff. Let's attend carefully. Through this memory, likewise, which pre-exists in the universe, whole souls are established in intelligibles, and the demiurgic reasons, or productive principles, possess an immutable and immovable nature. So memory is in the universe, and the reason principles of nature have an immutability and immovability because of that memory that's built into the universe. So that such beings as are deprived of it, as is the case with partial souls, and the natures of things that are generated fall off from their proper causes. So it's a failure of memory. Interesting then that in one of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which is Gnostic texts, Christian Gnosticism, they say that forgetfulness is like the root of sin. That's not exactly how Proclus treats it in like the problem of evil, on the nature of evils, that essay, which I highly recommend. But yeah, okay, so partial souls that lack that complete memory fall away from their proper causes. So it is kind of a lack of memory, partly, that is to blame for the fall. That's important. But the terms such things and about which are indicative of the quantity and quality of the productive principles, which proceed indeed from the total fabrication and also proceed from more partial gods. We're going to go back and look at the quote. Do you remember, therefore, the magnitude and quality of the things which I proposed to you to explain? Such things, I'm not seeing those exact phrases, such things and about which. Yeah, I'm not seeing those phrases in the quote, so I'm not sure exactly where he's referring to here. But, okay. So it's a call to remember, and then we're looking at the quantity and quality of productive principles. And those principles proceed from the whole fabrication, but also the natural reason principles, spermatikos, logos, do proceed from the partial gods as well, so like the younger gods, who are identified with the planets, but they're not the only encosmic gods. And with respect to the words, quote, which I proposed to you to explain, end quote, if they were addressed to Critias and Hermocrates, it is evident how they are to be referred to things, and to the principles of the fabrication of the world. But if also to Timaeus, they are not a symbol of transcendency in Socrates, but of an evocation of the intellectual conceptions of Timaeus. Besides these things, however, let us survey the answer of Timaeus. So Proclus leaves open the possibility that when Socrates is giving out the plan of the discussion, he's really addressing Critias and Hermocrates, and Timaeus, maybe that's why he seems somewhat disconnected from what Socrates was announcing as the plan when he gives his discourse on physics. But if not separate, then maybe these sayings are addressed to Timaeus versus Critias and Hermocrates in separate ways. Critias and Hermocrates being inferior, Timaeus being superior. But let's keep going. So, quote Timaeus, some things indeed I recollect, but such as I have forgotten, do you recall into my memory? So, Timaeus indicates a failure of memory there. The philosopher is supposed to have an excellent memory. So I don't know if this shows that Timaeus being superior to Socrates in the mind of Plato, or if that's what Plato intended. That's Proclus's interpretation so far, so we'll see what he makes of this indication of possible failure of memory on the part of Timaeus. That which is ethical in these words you will find to be this, as Porphyry says, that they are a medium between irony and arrogance. For Timaeus does not say that he recollects everything, nor that he recollects nothing, but that he recollects some things and not others. That which is logical in them is that they afford a pretext for the summary repetition of the problems, for to do this is the province of dialectic. Okay. So getting Socrates to reiterate points belongs to dialectic. I guess more properly it belongs to rhetoric. In the Phaedrus, when they're rehearsing the various aspects of rhetoric, a summation of the points already covered is one of those aspects of the rhetorical art. But I suppose enumerating the problems as a summary is part of dialectic, as the science of scientific discourse. The physical indication of the words is this, that physical productive principles always remain and are always reflexive, just as the present remembrance of Timaeus is partly preserved and partly lost. So physical productive principles they always remain and are always reflexive. A reflux is like acid reflux, like a backwards flow. So they remain and yet backwardly flow. So somehow that is symbolic of being partly preserved, partly lost. So I guess the reflux of the physical principles is akin to the loss of memory in some respect. So there's a capacity for a forgetfulness of nature then, by analogy here. So I don't know exactly what Proclus means by the reflux of the productive principles. Let's just get a definition of that term so I make sure I understand it. All that's coming up is acid reflux. So it occurs when stomach acid repeatedly flows back into the tube connecting your mouth and stomach. I'll look reflux definition. The process of boiling a liquid so that any vapor is liquefied, returning to the stock. That's the chemistry definition. Medicine, the flow of a fluid through a vessel or valve in the body in a direction opposite to normal. Yeah, so it's backwards flow. So what would that backwards flow be exactly in the productive principles? I guess it's joining them with their proper cause. So there's a backwards connection to the demiurge. I don't know how that's exactly connected to a forgetfulness, but okay. All right. We'll keep going. And I'll keep a better eye on the chat on YouTube. See, reflective journey is in here. It makes sense since anamnesis is remembering the form in the soul. It's a self-relation. I didn't see exactly when he commented that, so I can't connect it to the present discussion, but I will keep a better eye out, like I said. Turning on itself, again, reading the chat, turning onto itself may be something like the one turning to itself. Yeah, here we're dealing with the productive principles of nature, the spermatikos logos. They are partly preserved, or they always remain, rather, and always are reflexive. So they always revert and always abide. And I guess preceded originally in the demiurgic act of creation. But, okay. And that's related, again, as the partial remembrance, partial forgetfulness of Timaeus. For what is said by the man must be transferred to the whole of nature. Because that's the scopos of the dialogue, so anything that Timaeus says we have to relate to all of nature. And the theological indication is that the one fabrication, which is that of the demiurge, possesses indeed from itself the immutable and undefiled in its generations, but through secondary and third powers is sustained as it proceeds. Okay. The theological indication, it's immutable and undefiled in its generations. Through secondary and third powers, it's sustained as it proceeds, and is in itself separate. These powers attending it as guards, and running as it were before it, repress the tumult of generated natures. I don't see anything having to do with the forgetfulness here, but okay, the procession of the demiurge, creative powers, immutable, undefiled, secondary powers attend it, guard it, and disseminate it. We'll just keep going. Or rather, that this fabrication is such through placing secondary powers over the subjects of its government. Farther still, the recalling into the memory brings with it an image of the renovation of the productive principles in the universe. For that which is effluxive in them is circularly recalled to the same and the similar. Okay, so there's a backward flow and then a return back to the same. So there's a, like I said before, Proclus is indicating a kind of forgetfulness and then a recollection of the natural principles themselves. You know, the notion of like morphic resonance and a kind of built-in memory in nature that Rupert Sheldrake talks about comes to mind here. And the order of generation remains never failing, though through the circular motion of the heavens. So it never fails, it abides, and yet there is a kind of forgetfulness and remembering, I guess, deriving then from the circularity of the heavens like pass out of our view and then come back. So that makes sense astronomically then. The heavens are kind of forgotten and then recollected, but remain always fresh and always the same. Okay. But this motion subsists always after the same manner through intellect, which connectedly contains and adorns all its circulation by intellectual powers. So the physical and soul circulation and natural circulation relates to the intellectual reversions that contain and sow the seeds of this circularity back to the same. It is very properly, therefore, Socrates that recalls into the memory the discussions, who is the narrator of the polity, of which the celestial is the paradigm. Okay, so this recollection of the nature of the discussion is an image where Socrates represents the political philosopher. The polity is the icon of the cosmos, and so that polity recalls the nature of the cosmos, and so Socrates recalls the nature of this discussion. Some of this stuff is a stretch, gotta say, but it's, we're getting into the mindset of these later Neoplatonists who developed a way of thinking that is hard for us to relate to in general, but there's a lot of, you might have to dig for gold in some of this, but it's there for sure. Okay, quote, and this is Timaeus speaking still. Or rather, if it be not too much trouble, run over the whole in a cursory manner from the beginning, that it may be more firmly established in our memory. Proclus. The polity of Socrates being triple, the first description of it was truly difficult on account of sophistical contests. The second was easier than that which preceded it, but the third was perfectly easy, containing in itself contractedly every species of a polity. Okay, so the first section of the Republic involves disputes with Thrasymachus, and then he unfolds it directly, and then he recapitulates it, so that's a threefold nature. The recapitulation, however, of it pertains to physical things, through the regeneration which is in them, and the circular return to the same form, from which also forms permanently remain in the world, revolution recalling their efflux and their destruction. Right. So the recapitulation is like the recapitulation of nature. I again would associate that with the kind of turning of the heavens. Also, of course, in the Statesman, we have the idea that the demiurge creates the cosmos perfectly ordered, and it degrades because he can't always attend to it. The gods have other things to do. They have their own circular motions to attend to. And then, so the cosmos degrades through entropy, and then the demiurge has to intervene and revert the cosmos back to a state of order. So it's like he has to wind up the clock on the cosmos and let it run again. So there is a kind of gradual forgetting. That's at a longer time scale, not like the daily rotation of the heavens. But I think I get kind of what Proclus is getting at then. Through this cause, likewise, the heavens are perpetually moved, and evolving many periods return to the same life. What, however, is the reason that in the first narration of a polity, Socrates neither makes mention of the persons nor the promises, but here adds both these? It is because in wholes, paradigms indeed comprehend all the productive principles of images, but the things which proceed from them have not strength sufficient to comprehend all the power of their causes. As therefore, in the second description of a polity, mention is made of the persons that were in the first conference in the Piraeus, thus also in the third he commemorates those that were passed over in silence in the first. For effects may be surveyed more perfectly in their more superior causes. You may also say theologically that Timaeus, as being established analogous to the total fabrication, comprehends all the persons, the promises, and the discussions themselves. But Socrates in the Republic, being arranged analogous to the summit of the triple fabrication, the demiurgic triad, fashions only the form of a polity, this form being celestial. Here, therefore, as in one all-perfect animal, all things are comprehended, viz. Things first, middle, and last, and all the evolution of wholes. But how, and through what cause, is a polity narrated the third time? Is it because the life also of the soul is triple? The first, indeed, being that which represses and adorns the irrational part by justice and governs it in a becoming manner. Okay. So represses and adorns the irrational part. That's the first aspect of the life of soul, governing the irrational part of itself by justice. But the second being that which is converted to itself and desires to perceive itself intellectually in consequence of subsisting according to its own justice. So once, in other words, civic virtue, civic justice has been attained, then the next step for the soul is an intellectual reversion upon itself, live the life of the mind after you've lived the kind of ethical life of society. And the third, ascending to its causes and establishing in them its proper energies. So after self-reversion, then you revert back to your proper causes and live the theological life. So this is kind of like adumbrating the ladder of virtues notion, on which there's an episode on this channel that you can check out of understanding Platonism. It's just called the ladder of virtues. I might have titled it Scala Virtutem, but to which may be added that to speak in a cursory manner brings with it an image of a life conspiring to one intellect, which comprehends all things through an intelligible essence. So abbreviating, condensing the discussion, again, points to intelligible essences because they are more uniform. So you're making this extended dialogue from the Republic into a more uniform, condensed thing. The words also, run over the whole, afford an admirable indication of an elevation to the highest end of perfection, and if you are willing so to speak, of a more eternal intelligence. So we're dealing with wholes, and I guess that's pointing us back to the perfection of that whole and the highest end of that whole, not dealing with partial natures. But this signifies to be more established and to possess that which is more firm and more eternal about the same things. Okay, so next, Socrates from the dialogue. Let it be so. And to begin, the sum of what was said by me yesterday is this. What kind of polity appeared to me to be the best, and of what sort of men such a polity ought to consist? Proclus. Some, considering the resumption of a polity in a more ethical point of view, say that it indicates to us that those who apply themselves to the theory of wholes ought to be adorned in their manners. But others think that it is placed before us in an image of the orderly distribution of the universe, and others as an indication of the whole of theology. For it was usual with the Pythagoreans, prior to scientific doctrine, to render manifest the proposed objects of inquiry through similitudes and images, and after this, to introduce through symbols the arcane indication respecting them. Okay, so that's an important thing. The Pythagoreans, before giving a scientific theory, would embody it in images and then symbolically interpret those images and bring it back to the theory, which is a common teaching method, really, to give like an analogy for a complex technical theory, and that would help you understand the theory. For thus, after the excitation of the intellect, or rather intellection of the soul, and the purification of its eye, it is requisite to introduce the whole science of the things which are the subjects of discussion. Okay. All right. Here, therefore, the concise narration of a polity prior to physiology iconically places us in the fabrication of the universe, but the history of the Atlantics accomplishes this symbolically. Okay, so the reiteration of the Republic, the points from the Republic, that is iconically representing the topic of this dialogue, the creation of the universe, and then the Atlantis story represents it symbolically. So that's a little bit different than what I just interpreted. I assumed he meant that first you lay it out in the images and icons, and then you interpret it symbolically. But really he's saying it's kind of a gradated process where first you give icons, let's get the exact terms, first through similitudes and images, and then through symbols, and then the actual scientific theory. So images, icons, similitudes that go. So this would be like a synopsis of a theory, or something akin to the theory, something in the image of a theory, and then a symbolical rendition of the theory, and then the theory itself, as Proclus states here. For it is usual with fables to indicate many things through symbols, but that the physiological character pervades through the whole of the dialogue, but differently in different places, according to the different modes of the doctrine which is delivered. And thus much concerning the scope of the proposed words. In the present discussion, however, the summary repetition of a polity very properly takes place, may be multifariously inferred. Alright, so that it's proper we can infer on many grounds. So, for the political science subsists primarily in the demiurge of the universe, as we may learn in the Protagoras. Interesting. I don't remember that passage from the Protagoras where that would be obvious. But okay, next time we look at the Protagoras, bear in mind the consummate political scientist is the creator of the universe, which makes sense. And true virtue shines forth in this sensible world. Hence also, so the true virtue, true justice of the demiurge shines forth in his creation. Hence also Timaeus says that the world is known and is friendly to itself through virtue. Justice connects the various aspects of the soul, so the virtue, justice of the demiurge allows the self-conversation of the cosmos, its self-knowledge and its friendliness to itself, which redounds to its happiness. Farther still, the polity of Socrates being triple, and the first being referred to the total fabrication, as we have elsewhere shown, the form of this is very properly delivered here contractedly, where it is proposed to survey the whole demiurge, generating and adorning the universe. These things, therefore, are capable of being still farther discussed. Let us, however, return to the text and the words of Socrates. But in these there is much contention among the interpreters, who oppose each other about a certain punctuation, and with reference to this, differently explain the scope of the discussion. For some, making a stop at the word polity, to find the scope of it to be conformable to the inscription, and deduce Plato as a witness that it is concerning a polity. Excuse me. Others, again, making a stop at the words "what was said," evince that the scope of it is about justice, and that Socrates has given a certain summary of what was said about justice, which is concerning a polity. If, however, it is requisite not to trifle in asserting and contradicting, it must be said that both concur with each other. For the discourse concerning justice is a disquisition of the polity which is within the soul, for it rightly disposes the communion of the powers which we contain. The discourse likewise about a polity is a discussion of the justice which subsists in multitude. Both, therefore, pertain to the same thing, and the same thing is indeed justice in the soul, a polity in a city, and gracefulness in the world. nor is it fit to separate from each other things which are conjoined by nature. And thus much for this particular. Longinus, however, and Origen contend with each other from another principle, about what kind of polity Socrates speaks in these words, whether about the first or the middle polity. Okay. I don't know what these two types of polity is. Elsewhere in his essays on the Republic, Proclus mentions that the topic of the Republic is the absolutely ideal polity. So maybe that's what he means by the first polity. The topic in the laws is the best kind of achievable polity. So he's addressing different types of states. Not the laws is not about the ideal state. It's about what we could reasonably achieve in the Greek world of his time. For in the latter, the polity is seen living physically, politically, and intellectually. In the latter, I guess the middle polity. We'll just read and try to interpret as we go. Let me restart the paragraph so we can keep it all coherent here. Longinus, however, and Origen contend with each other from another principle about what kind of polity Socrates speaks, in these words, whether about the first or the middle polity. For in the latter, the polity is seen living physically, politically, and intellectually. Longinus therefore thinks that what is here said pertains to the middle polity, because Socrates calls the assistants guardians and says that the guardians are warriors. But Origen is of opinion that what is said respects the first polity, for in this Socrates delivers disciplines to the guardians. We, however, say in answer to such like assertions that it is not proper to divulge the one polity, nor to separate the continuity of life from itself, for the polity is one, perfecting itself and co-augmenting itself by more perfect additions. But the whole polity possesses the physical in the mercenaries, the warlike in the auxiliaries, and the intellectual in the guardians, so that the discussion is about the whole polity. Okay, I'm not sure about the first and middle polity. It seems like this is two aspects that have been distinguished in the Republic itself. We will actually just keep going and not worry too much about this particular. And it is not proper to contend about these things, but rather to consider this, how the polity may very properly be said to be both subordinate to and superior to physiology. For so far as it has for its matter human concerns, and is desirous of adorning these, it has an order secondary to, and more partial than physiology. But so far as it subsists in universal reasonings, and is arranged incorporeally and immaterially, it is superior to, and more total than physiology. So the concern with particular human beings, particular human embodied beings being part of the cosmos, it's subordinate to cosmology, but in that we're dealing with an immaterial design of the perfect state, in that sense, that logos of the ideal polity is superior to the cosmos, because things immaterial are just superior to things material. Who is this? Hermias makes a similar point in the commentary on the Phaedrus, where in the beginning, Lysias's interest, maybe it's not Lysias. Lysias is the speech giver. Phaedrus, of course. Phaedrus's interest in Lysias's speech is an indication of his somewhat elevated nature, because he's not concerned with physical things, but with logoi, or speeches, which are kind of immaterial. So I guess that's the point being made here, that in one respect, insofar as it's immaterial, the justice of the ideal state is superior to the world. Insofar as it is about the arrangement of the physical, it's subordinate to the whole of the physical. The world also is a certain polity, and a partial polity with reference to the intelligible world, because every body is partial. So even the whole cosmos is partial with reference to the intelligible world. In short, the polity pre-exists, indeed, in the intelligible, but exists in the heavens, and subsists in the last place in human lives. so that if it is superior to physical fabrication, it was very properly discussed prior to the Timaeus. But if it is inferior to it, because it is an ethical world, but the other is mundane and all perfect, we are very properly required to recur from things subordinate to such as are of a more venerable nature. And both are true through the above-mentioned causes. Since, however, as we have said, the form of the polity is universal and is impressed in a partial matter, hence also Socrates employs the words what kind for the sake of the form, but the words of what sort of men on account of the matter. So he's reconciling Longinus and Origen, I suppose, by saying it is kind of standing in one respect superior to, and in another respect inferior to the Scopos being discussed, which is that kind of physical cosmos. All right. So Timaeus, back in the dialogue, and what was said, Socrates, was in the opinion of all of us, very conformable to intellect. Right. So he was just summarizing what he talked about last time, and Timaeus says, and it was, in all of our opinion, very conformable to intellect. So he's just approving of the discussion from yesterday. A narration conformable to intellect, but neither conformable to pleasure, nor the decision of the vulgar, indicates the admirable perfection and intellectual nature of the discussion contained in it. And prior to this, it obscurely signifies the concordant congress of all secondary causes about one intellect and one united fabrication. The word very, too, which is added, unfolds the transcendent union, through which all demiurgic causes converge as to one center, and one paternal cause of all things. So again, kind of a stretch, but we see the point. Next quote, Socrates, did we not then, in the first place, separate husbandmen and other artificers from the belligerent genus, from the guardians and auxiliaries? So he begins his summary of the points from the Republic, or from whatever occasion he gave this explanation of the ideal polity to the audience that's present, plus the fourth person who is still unnamed. So the discourse about a polity and the conglomerated and concise repetition in a summary way of the genre contained in it contributes to the whole narration of the mundane fabrication, for it is possible from these as images to recur to wholes. This very thing also was in a remarkable degree adopted by the Pythagoreans, who investigated the similitudes of beings from analogies, and betook themselves from images to paradigms, which likewise is now in a prefatory manner affected by Plato, who points out to us and gives us to survey in human lives those things which take place in the universe. For the polities of worthy men are assimilated to the celestial order. It is necessary, therefore, that we also should refer the images which are now mentioned to their paradigms, and in the first place, what is said about the division of the genre. Okay, so that being said, let's look at these bits of summary and see what they embody or symbolize. For this section of genre imitates the demiurgic division in the world, according to which incorporeal natures are not able to pass into the nature of bodies, nor mortal bodies to leave their own essence and migrate into an incorporeal hypostasis. Okay, so these are some real divisions in the physical world. We're dealing with a division in the polity. How exactly they're connected in this particular way is not clear yet. According to which also mortal natures remain mortal, immortal natures eternally continue to be never failing, and the different orders of them have paradigmatic causes presubsisting in wholes. For if you are willing to arrange the whole city analogous to the whole world, since it must not be said that man is a microcosm and a city not, and to divide it into two parts, the upper city and the lower, and to assimilate the former to the heavens and the latter to generation, you will find that the analogy is perfectly appropriate. Okay, so just as before he indicated that Atlantis may represent generation, and Athens, the celestial realm. So here, the upper city with the guardians and auxiliaries represents the eternal, and then the lower city, husbandmen, craftsmen, etc., it represents generation, the sublunary. Likewise, although even the celestial is in generation as a whole, I suppose, I would think that the term generation really applies to the entire cosmos, but maybe it should be applied to the sublunary specifically, because I'll just have to be careful about looking for how generation is used. We want to get the vocabulary as true to Platonic use as possible. Likewise, according to a division of it into three parts, you may assume in the city the mercenary, the military, and the guardian. But in the soul, the epithumetic part, which procures the necessities of the body, the appetitive, the irascible part, whose office is to expel whatever is injurious to the animal, the thumotic or spirited part, and is also ministrant to our ruling power, so it assists the intellect and expels what is injurious to the body, and the rational part, which is essentially philosophic and has a regal authority over the whole of our life. In every multitude of souls, however, there are that which performs the part of a mercenary about generation, that which is ministrant to the mundane province of the gods, and that which is elevated to the intelligible. But in all mundane natures, there are, in short, the tribe of mortals, the tribe of daimons, and the order of the celestial gods. So in all the things of the world, we have mortals, daimons, and encosmic gods, for they are truly the guardians and saviors of the whole of things. And the three, so that corresponds to the tripartite soul. And again, daimons precede, as in a solemn procession, the fabrication of the celestial gods. So the fabrication of the gods being like the abiding, daimons being the preceding, and then mortal souls being reverting, and suppress all the confusion and disorder in the world. So daimons are regulating and ordering the world in accordance with the design of the celestial gods, who contain that order in their own abiding nature. There is likewise a certain physical providence of mortal natures, which generates and comprehends them conformably to a divine intellect. So mortal natures are also continuing this act of like demiurgic order and regulation. Farther still, according to another division, the agricultural tribe of the city is analogous to the moon, which comprehends the sacred laws of nature, the cause of generation. So, yeah, maybe generation should refer specifically to the sublunary, but the inspective guardian of the common marriages is analogous to Venus, who is the cause of all harmony, and of the union of the male with the female, and of form with matter. Okay, Venus, symbolized by the guardian responsible for arranging marriages, presides over the union of male and female, and form and matter. Form being like the male, matter like the female. That which providentially attends to elegant allotments is analogous to Hermes, on account of the lots of which the god is the guardian, and also on account of the fraud which they contain. So Hermes is like kind of a trickster in certain ways, and the lots, they draw lots to see who is going to be paired with whom in the arranged unions. So I suppose that's what's being said, although I would think that would be the same guardian who's like responsible for the lots and the arrangement of the marriages, because the lots are used for the marriages. But okay, Venus and Hermes together are responsible for that whole process. But that which is, or rather, not that process itself in the polity, but the analogous process in the universe. But that which is disciplinative and judicial in the city is analogous to the sun, with whom, according to theologists, the mundane decay, the elevator and the sevenfold reside. So with the sun reside, I think this is DK as in victory, the elevator and the sevenfold muses reside. You get a lot of like very specific pagan theological references and mythological references that we might not be able to track all of them. And that which is belligerent is analogous to the order proceeding from Mars, which governs all the contrarieties of the world. So yeah, the combative nature of Mars presides over mundane contrarieties, oppositions, makes sense, and the diversity of the universe. So the conflictual is related to the diverse aspect as well. That which is royal is analogous to Jupiter, who is the supplier of ruling prudence and of the practical and adorning intellect. But that which is philosophic is analogous to Saturn, so far as he is an intellectual god. So that would be Kronos in the Greek. Jupiter obviously would be Zeus, Mars, Ares, DK, I don't know. Or maybe that's another goddess. Let's look up Roman goddess DK. Roman god DK. Yeah, I mean, DK came up, goddess of justice. So I guess we're looking at a mix of Greek and Latin terms for the gods, which is kind of annoying. But all right. All right. So Jupiter, ruling providence, practical and adorning intellect. The ruling power, Zeus, and then Kronos is more intellectual, and he ascends as far as to the first cause. Right. And Kronos is kind of the immediate archetype behind the Zeusian demiurge. Zeus is the hypercosmic Zeus outside of the cosmos. You know, Jupiter, the planet, it embodies the younger god Zeus. But beyond the cosmos, there is hypercosmic Zeus, and that is the same as the demiurge of holes for Proclus. We learned in the commentary on the Cratylus. But Kronos is his kind of archetype. So Kronos holds all of the forms together in a more concentrated way, in a more intellectual way than even the Zeusian demiurge. Don't press me on the distinction exactly there, but the demiurge is more preparing all of the forms for their outflowing. Kronos is more like where the forms first come together in a singular intelligence. So Saturn then is a more intellectual god, and he ascends as far as the first cause. These things, therefore, may thus be assumed through analogies. Plato, however, appears to have divided the city into two parts, and to have established as one genus that which is agricultural and that which pertains to the arts, which is called demiurgic, but that which is, because demiurge just means craft, essentially, in Greek, but that which is belligerent as another. Not that he now recapitulates the military polity, as Longinus says. Oh, I see. So Longinus was arguing that he was talking in the summary about the guardian aspect of the society, and then Origen was saying he was talking about the lower aspect of the society, which neither of which makes sense, and I would have to assume that somehow or another Proclus is being uncharitable, because that reading seems totally wacky. And obviously he's talking Socrates is summarizing both aspects of the state, but okay. Not that he now recapitulates the military polity, as Longinus says, but because through the word belligerent he comprehends the auxiliaries and the guardians. For of these, the former war with their hands, but the latter by their counsels. Just as also among the Greeks, Ajax indeed fights, as being the barrier of the Greeks, and Nestor likewise fights, who is the guardian of the Greeks, the latter as a defender, repelling the enemy by his counsels, but the former by employing his hands. Unless it should be said that Plato now peculiarly makes mention of the military tribe, because he wishes to narrate the warlike actions of a polity of this kind. Okay, how long is this next section? Because I'm kind of reaching where I'd like to stop. This next section is quick, so we'll read it. Socrates, and when he had assigned to everyone that which is accommodated to his nature, and had prescribed one employment only to each of the arts, we likewise assigned to the military tribe one province only. Proclus, in the first place there is a twofold reading of these words, for it either is, and when we had prescribed one employment conformable to nature to each of the citizens, in order that each might perform his proper work, or when we had prescribed to each to pursue an employment conformable to nature, which is adapted to each according to the present aptitude of his nature. In the next place, it must be inquired through what cause Socrates makes such a division, or on what account he says, quote, that each employment is rightly pursued by him who is naturally adapted to it, and who in a becoming manner engages in it. For neither is diligent attention, when deprived of aptitude, able to accomplish with rectitude anything perfect, nor can dexterity without diligent attention proceed into energy. The end, therefore, is from both. If, however, this be the case, it is not possible for him who engages in many works to be similarly adapted to all of them, or to pay attention similarly to all, in consequence of his ardor being divided about a multitude of things. Hence, in this case, the pursuits of the citizens must necessarily appear to be of a viler nature. But if this is not right, one employment should be assigned to each of the citizens, to which he to whom it is distributed is adapted, and he should be ordered to extend all his care and attention to one thing. For he who is properly adapted to this particular life and pursues it in a becoming manner conformably to nature, will, it is likely, perform in the best way his proper work. In human polities, therefore, it is easy to survey a division of this kind, for our nature is partible. But how is this true with respect to the gods? Okay, so, right. This principle is applied to... I didn't really get a strong distinction between these two ways of interpreting the passage, but all right, it applies to mortals, obviously, and so how is it then iconically representing divine natures and the construction of the universe? For a divine nature is all-powerful and all-perfect, or may we not say that with the gods, all things are in all of them, but that each is all things according to the peculiarity of himself, and possesses the cause of all things, one after a solar, but another after a mercurial manner. For particularity originating from the divine unities proceeds through intellectual essences, through divine souls, and through the bodies of these souls. Hence, of these, some participate of demiurgic, others of prolific, others of connective, and others of a dividing power. So the gods are all-powerful, but they emphasize one aspect, and in the series, the rays, serai, from the henads, through the intelligibles, through the souls, down to the divine bodies, that is, the planets, in that series, then, one aspect is brought out of the divine powers, and after this manner they energize about generation. In divine natures themselves, therefore, peculiarity pre-exists, defining the unities according to the infinity which is there and the divine dyad. But in intellects, difference is pre-existent, which separates wholes and parts, and distributes intellectual powers, imparting a different peculiar order to a different intellect, through which the purity of intellects is not confounded. One thing he says about the forms is that they are more distinct from one another than mundane natures, but they're also more integrated. So they are both more united to each other. Sorry about that. They're more united to each other, and yet they are also more distinct from each other, which seems contradictory, seems impossible for a mundane thing, but that's how they are. In souls, progression and division presubsist according to a different life in different souls. In souls, progression and division presubsist, according to a different life and different souls, some of them being allotted a divine, others an angelic, others a daimonical, and others a different hyparxis. Hyparxis is like the summit of essence. You could translate it as existence as well. It's sometimes translated that way. But in bodies, emorwoll pre-exists, producing different powers in different bodies. So he's tracking how these peculiarities manifest and are contained at different levels. So to review, so the divine henads have their own peculiarities that presubsist. In intellects, the real differences presubsist. So the distinction between a peculiarity and a difference is interesting. Peculiarities, I guess, don't separate essences from one another. They are like the prefiguring of intellectual differentiation. Intellects pre-contain those differences. Souls pre-contain progression and division. In bodies, emorwoll is contained, producing different powers in different bodies, but in these there are ultimate representations of intelligibles, according to which this particular body is effective of this thing, but another of that. And this body has a sympathy for this thing, but another sympathizes with something else. As therefore in this universe everything acts according to nature upon that which it was arranged by the fabrication of things to act upon. Thus also in the city, the employments of the citizens are divided, and each is arranged to perform that for which he is naturally adapted. What therefore the works are of the military tribe, Timaeus clearly shows in what follows. Okay, so he's explained how, for humans, division of labor is natural and obvious. For the gods and divine powers, it's less obvious, but now we see that these distinctions are there even in more unitive, higher natures, and they appear at different grades, at different levels of the ontological hierarchy. And we'll have to call it a day, although, I don't know, maybe I'll come back later on today. We're trying to really, burn through this thing as quickly as we can while still comprehending it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We will continue